The repair imperative: ownership, sustainability, and self-sufficiency from Earth to Mars. Executive summary: the right to repair movement, a global and multifaceted campaign, has transcended its origins as a niche consumer rights issue to become a central question of 21st century technological stewardship. At its core, the movement challenges the erosion of personal property rights in an era where physical goods are increasingly governed by restrictive software and digital locks. Manufacturers, through a variety of technical and legal means, have systematically curtailed the ability of owners to repair, modify, or choose their own service provider for products they have purchased, creating lucrative repair monopolies. This report argues that the implications of this shift extend far beyond consumer inconvenience, touching upon fundamental issues of environmental sustainability, economic justice, legal liability, and ultimately the long-term viability of human technological expansion. The analysis begins by deconstructing the modern concept of ownership, revealing how software licensing has been used to transform product owners into mere licensees of functionality. It traces the history of the right to repair movement from early 20th century antitrust battles to its current legislative momentum across the globe, comparing the comprehensive, design-focused approach of the European Union with the fragmented, state-led model in the United States and Canada's targeted focus on copyright law. The report then establishes the terrestrial imperatives driving the movement. It demonstrates a direct causal link between repair restrictions, the business strategy of planned obsolescence, and the escalating global crisis of electronic waste, e-waste. By framing repair not just as a right but as a potent sustainability strategy, the analysis shows it to be a more effective environmental lever than recycling. Furthermore, it highlights the profound pro-social benefits of a robust repair economy, including consumer empowerment, cost savings, the creation of resilient local economies, and the promotion of digital equity. A focused investigation into the field of robotics reveals the unique and heightened challenges of applying repair principles to autonomous systems. The report proposes a tiered framework for regulation, distinguishing between low-risk consumer robots, economically critical agricultural and industrial systems, and safety-critical medical robots, where the stakes involve human life. It explores the black box problem of repairing artificial intelligence and the complex liability questions that arise, arguing that the right to repair will force a necessary evolution in tort law for autonomous systems. Finally, the report extends its analysis to the speculative but logically necessary future of off-world human colonization. In the isolated, high-stakes environment of a Martian or lunar settlement, the ability to repair, maintain, and fabricate critical systems is not a matter of choice but of survival. The report concludes that the tyranny of distance renders Earth-based supply chains untenable, making self-sufficiency, underpinned by a universal right to repair and access to digital blueprints for technologies like 3D printing, a non-negotiable prerequisite. In this final frontier, the right to repair transforms from a consumer right into a fundamental human right to life, a principle that must be embedded in the design of all future critical technologies, both on and off-world. Part 1. The Re-emergence of Repair. A movement for the digital age. The contemporary debate surrounding the right to repair is not merely about the ability to fix a broken smartphone or tractor. It represents a fundamental conflict over the nature of ownership in a world where physical objects are inextricably fused with digital code. This section establishes the foundational concepts of the movement, tracing the historical and legal precedents that have led to the current impasse. It argues that manufacturers have strategically leveraged software and intellectual property law to redefine a centuries-old understanding of property, transforming owners into licensees and creating closed ecosystems that stifle competition and consumer choice. In response, a global movement has coalesced around a clear set of principles aimed at restoring the basic rights that have long been associated with possession. 1.1 The erosion of ownership. From possessor to licensee. For most of history, the concept of owning a physical object was simple. Once purchased, the owner had the right to use, modify, repair, and resell it as they saw fit. This principle, deeply rooted in common law property doctrine, has been systematically eroded by the integration of software into nearly every category of product. The central conflict of the right to repair movement stems from a legal and technical maneuver by manufacturers, asserting that while a consumer may own the hardware of a device, they only hold a limited license for the software that makes it function. This effectively renders the physical object inert without the manufacturer's continued permission, fundamentally altering the owner's relationship with their property. This is not an accidental byproduct of technological progress, but a deliberate strategy to create and control lucrative aftermarkets for repair and service. Manufacturers employ an array of shady anti-repair strategies to enforce this new paradigm. These include physical barriers, such as the use of proprietary screws or gluing components together, making disassembly difficult or destructive. More potent, however, are the software-based restrictions. Parts pairing, for instance, involves serializing individual components like a camera or screen to a device's main logic board. If a genuine replacement part from another identical device is installed, the system's software will reject it, disabling functionality or displaying persistent warning messages until the manufacturer's proprietary software is used to authorize the new part. This practice effectively prevents independent shops from using salvaged parts from donor devices, a cornerstone of affordable repair. This control is legally buttressed by intellectual property, IP, laws that were never intended to govern the repair of physical goods. In the United States, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, of 1998 includes provisions that prohibit the circumvention of technological protection measures, TPMs, or digital locks, that control access to copyrighted works. Originally designed to prevent the piracy of digital media like movies and music, manufacturers have co-opted these provisions to argue that bypassing a software lock to diagnose or repair a tractor or a smartphone is a violation of copyright law. This legal interpretation creates a chilling effect where the act of repairing one's own property is framed as an illicit act of hacking. The result is a paradox. A consumer physically possesses an object, yet is legally barred from accessing and maintaining its core functionality, demoting them from a true owner to a temporary licensee of a service embedded in a physical shell. The right to repair movement is, therefore, a direct response to this profound redefinition of property rights, seeking to prevent software licensing from completely consuming the concept of physical ownership. 1.2 Principles of a Modern Movement, the Four Pillars of Repair. In response to the erosion of ownership, the international right to repair movement has articulated a clear and consistent set of demands. These principles are not radical, rather they aim to restore the traditional rights of owners by ensuring that repair remains a viable, accessible, and affordable option in the digital age. The movement's goals can be distilled into four foundational pillars that directly counteract the restrictive practices of manufacturers. First is the access to information. Proponents demand that manufacturers make repair manuals, diagnostic information, and electronic schematics freely available to both product owners and independent repair professionals. Manufacturers already produce this documentation for their internal use and for their networks of authorized service providers. Withholding it serves no purpose other than to make independent and do-it-yourself repairs more difficult and dangerous, thereby maintaining a monopoly on knowledge. Second is the access to parts and tools. The movement calls for original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, to sell spare parts and any specialized physical or software tools directly to consumers and independent repair shops. This access must be provided on fair and reasonable terms, meaning at prices and conditions that are not designed to be prohibitive or to give an unfair advantage to the manufacturer's own authorized network. This pillar directly challenges the practice of restricting parts to create a repair monopoly, which enables manufacturers to set artificially high prices, often cited as the 50% rule, where a repair cost approaching half the price of a new device pushes consumers toward replacement. Third is the freedom from software locks. This principle targets the most insidious forms of repair restriction. It asserts the right of owners to bypass software barriers that prevent the use of genuine, third-party, or salvaged components. This includes ending the practice of parts pairing, which renders perfectly functional components useless, if not authorized, by the manufacturer's proprietary software. This pillar also extends to the right to install third-party software on a device, allowing for customization, adaptation, and the potential to extend the life of hardware long after the manufacturer has ceased to support it. Fourth, and perhaps most proactively, is the call for design for repair. This principle advocates for a fundamental shift in product engineering, encouraging designs that facilitate rather than hinder repair. This means moving away from the use of strong adhesives in place of screws, avoiding proprietary fasteners where standard ones would suffice, and designing products with modular components that can be easily replaced. This pillar is a direct challenge to the ethos of planned obsolescence and aims to integrate durability and serviceability into the product lifecycle from the very beginning, aligning with broader goals of environmental sustainability and waste reduction. 1.3. A history of resistance. From antitrust to grassroots advocacy, the contemporary right to repair movement, while focused on digital-era products, is not a new phenomenon. It is the latest iteration of a long-running struggle between consumers and manufacturers over control of the aftermarket, the market for service, parts, and repairs that exists after the initial sale of a product. This history reveals a consistent pattern. As technology becomes more complex, manufacturers attempt to leverage that complexity to create monopolies, and in response, consumers and independent businesses seek legal and legislative remedies to ensure a competitive market. The conceptual roots of repairability can be traced to the Industrial Revolution and the development of interchangeable parts, a key innovation that made repair a practical alternative to replacement for the first time. However, the legal battles began in earnest in the 20th century. A landmark moment was the 1956 IBM consent decree, an antitrust action by the U.S. Department of Justice that found IBM to be a monopoly and required the company to allow for a used equipment market and independent repair. This principle was further solidified in the 1992 Supreme Court case Eastman, Kodak, Cole v. Image Technical Services, Inc., which established that a company could be considered a monopolist in the aftermarket for its own products, even if it faced competition in the primary market for those products. These cases form the bedrock of antitrust law related to repair. The modern legislative push gained significant momentum in the automotive industry. As vehicles became increasingly sophisticated, relying on complex onboard computer systems for everything from emissions monitoring to engine performance, independent mechanics found themselves locked out. Access to the diagnostic tools and software necessary for repairs was restricted to official dealerships, creating a de facto monopoly. This prompted a concerted effort by consumer groups and the automotive aftermarket industry, culminating in the passage of the first state-level right-to-repair law in Massachusetts in 2012. This law mandated that car manufacturers provide independent repair shops with the same diagnostic information and tools available to their own dealers. The success in the automotive sector provided a template for a broader movement, which was catalyzed by the proliferation of software-embedded consumer electronics. Companies like Apple, with their use of proprietary connectors, software locks, and a tightly controlled repair network, became a primary focus for activists. Similarly, agricultural equipment manufacturer John Deere faced intense criticism from farmers who were prevented by software locks from performing essential repairs on their own tractors, leading to costly downtime during critical planting and harvesting seasons. This digital escalation led to the formation of dedicated advocacy organizations such as the Digital Right to Repair Coalition, now the Repair Association, in 2013, which began coordinating legislative efforts across numerous states and industries, transforming a series of sector-specific grievances into a unified global movement. 1.4 The Global Legislative Patchwork, a Comparative Analysis. As the right to repair movement has gained global traction, a variety of legislative and regulatory responses have emerged. These approaches differ significantly in their philosophy, scope, and enforcement mechanisms, creating a complex and evolving compliance landscape for multinational corporations. A comparative analysis of the frameworks in the European Union, the United States, and Canada reveals three distinct strategic models for tackling repair restrictions. The European Union has adopted the most comprehensive and proactive approach, integrating the right to repair into its broader European Green Deal and circular economy objectives. The cornerstone of this strategy is the Right to Repair Directive R2RD, adopted in 2024. This directive establishes a legal obligation for manufacturers of certain goods, including smartphones, tablets, and household appliances, to offer repair services even after the legal 2-year guarantee has expired. It mandates that spare parts be available at a reasonable price and explicitly bans the use of software or hardware techniques that impede independent repair, such as parts pairing. To actively shift consumer behavior, the R2RD incentivizes repair over replacement by extending a product's legal guarantee by at least 12 months following a repair. This is complemented by eco-design regulations, which impose repairability requirements at the design stage and the introduction of a mandatory repair score to be displayed at the point of sale for certain electronics, empowering consumers to make informed choices. This holistic, design-focused strategy aims to solve the repair problem at its source rather than merely addressing its symptoms in the aftermarket. In contrast, the United States follows a reactive, fragmented, and state-led model. There is no overarching federal right to repair law, leaving the battle to be fought in individual state legislatures. This has resulted in a patchwork of laws with significant variations. New York's Digital Fair Repair Act was a pioneering piece of legislation for electronics, but its scope has been a point of contention. California's Right to Repair Act is more expansive, requiring parts and information to be available for up to 7 years for products over $100, but it also includes notable exemptions for products like video game consoles and alarm systems. Minnesota and Colorado have also passed their own versions, with Colorado notably being the first to pass a law specifically for agricultural equipment. This state-by-state approach creates compliance challenges for manufacturers operating nationwide and leaves consumers in many states without protection. Federal action has been limited to the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, leveraging existing authority under laws like the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act, which prohibits tying warranty coverage to the use of branded parts, and proposed, but not yet passed, federal legislation like the Repair Act, which targets the automotive industry. Canada has pursued a unique and surgically precise strategy, targeting the legal instrument that underpins many software-based repair restrictions, copyright law. In 2024, Canada passed Bill C-244, which amends the Federal Copyright Act to create an explicit exemption allowing the circumvention of technological protection measures, TPMs, for the purpose of diagnosis, maintenance, or repair. This approach directly addresses the legal argument used by manufacturers that accessing a device's software for repair constitutes copyright infringement. While this removes a key legal barrier, it does not, on its own, mandate the availability of parts or manuals, which is being addressed through separate amendments to the Competition Act and emerging provincial legislation in places like Quebec and Ontario. This global divergence in legislative strategy highlights the lack of a single, universally accepted solution. The EU's preventative design-centric framework appears the most resilient against future manufacturer tactics, as it seeks to build repairability into products from the outset. The US model, while achieving significant victories, remains vulnerable to lobbying efforts at the state level and lacks national consistency. Canada's approach is legally innovative but may require complementary regulations to ensure practical access to physical parts and information. Part 2. The Terrestrial Imperatives, Environment, Economy and Equity. The right to repair movement is propelled by more than abstract principles of ownership. It is a direct response to urgent, tangible crises. The modern economic model of mass consumption, characterized by a linear take, make, dispose pipeline, has generated unprecedented environmental degradation and social inequality. This section connects the dots between corporate strategies that restrict repair, the catastrophic global accumulation of electronic waste, and the profound environmental, economic, and social benefits that a repair-centric society can unlock. Repair is presented not as a nostalgic practice, but as a keystone for building a more sustainable, equitable, and resilient future. 2.1 The Linear Economy's Legacy, Planned Obsolescence, and the e-waste crisis. Repair restrictions are not an isolated phenomenon. They are a critical tool in the broader business strategy of planned obsolescence, the deliberate shortening of a product's lifespan to stimulate repeat purchases. This practice, which dates back to the early 20th century, has reached its zenith in the electronics industry, where frequent model updates and engineered fragility have created a culture of disposability. By making repairs difficult, expensive, or impossible, manufacturers ensure that consumers are funneled into a constant cycle of replacement, a cycle that directly fuels an environmental catastrophe, the global e-waste crisis. The scale of this crisis is staggering. In 2022, the world generated a record 62 million metric tons of electronic waste, a figure projected to surge past 82 million tons by 2030. To put this in perspective, the 2019 figure of 53.6 million tons was equivalent in weight to 350 cruise ships. This deluge of discarded devices represents a colossal failure of resource management. The vast majority of this waste is not handled properly. Global collection and recycling rates are alarmingly low, hovering between 17% and 22%. The consequences are dire. Much of the unrecycled e-waste is illegally shipped from developed nations to countries in Africa and Asia, where it accumulates in massive toxic dump sites. These sites are often scavenged by workers, including children, without protective equipment, exposing them to a cocktail of hazardous materials. Electronics contain toxic substances like lead, cadmium, mercury, and carcinogenic dioxins, which leach into the soil, contaminate groundwater, and are released into the atmosphere when burned. The environmental impact is profound and long-lasting. Despite constituting only 2% of the volume in US landfills, e-waste is responsible for over 70% of the waste's total toxicity. Furthermore, this cycle of premature replacement places immense strain on finite natural resources. The constant manufacturing of new devices drives the mining of raw materials, an inherently destructive process. This includes the extraction of so-called conflict minerals, like cobalt, a key component in lithium-ion batteries, which is often mined in conditions that involve child labor and perpetuate human rights abuses. The linear model of consumption, enabled by anti-repair practices, is therefore not only polluting the planet with waste, but is also actively depleting its resources and contributing to social injustice at the source of the supply chain. 2.2 The Circular Economy's Keystone, Repair as a Sustainability Strategy. The antidote to the destructive linear economy is the concept of a circular economy, a model where resources are not discarded but are kept in use for as long as possible, extracting their maximum value before being recovered and regenerated at the end of their service life. Within this model, repair is the most potent and immediate strategy for achieving circularity. While recycling is often presented as the primary solution to waste, it is, in fact, a last resort. The real environmental gains are made by extending the life of products that have already been manufactured. The logic is straightforward. The majority of a product's environmental footprint, including carbon emissions and resource consumption, is generated during its manufacturing phase. Every time a product is repaired instead of replaced, an entire cycle of mining, processing, manufacturing, and shipping is avoided. This makes repair an exponentially more effective environmental lever than recycling. The European Union's own impact assessment for its Right to Repair directive quantifies these benefits, estimating that over a 15-year period, the policy will save 1.8 million tonnes of natural resources, prevent 3 million tonnes of waste, and avoid 18.5 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions. Academic studies support this, with one finding that repairing industrial motors and generators rather than replacing them could decrease their global warming potential, GWP, by over 40% and 37%, respectively. By prioritizing repair, societies can achieve several critical sustainability goals simultaneously. First, it directly addresses the e-waste crisis by slowing the flow of devices into the waste stream. Second, it conserves finite natural resources by reducing the demand for virgin materials. Third, it lowers the overall carbon footprint of consumption by minimizing the energy-intensive manufacturing of new goods. The right to repair is therefore not just a consumer convenience. It is a foundational policy for any serious effort to combat climate change, resource depletion, and pollution. It is the essential keystone that enables the transition from a wasteful linear system to a sustainable circular one. 2.3. Empowerment and economic justice. The pro-social benefits of repair. Beyond its crucial environmental role, the right to repair is fundamentally a movement for economic and social justice. It seeks to rebalance the power dynamic between multinational corporations and individuals, fostering consumer empowerment, strengthening local economies, and promoting greater equity in a technologically dependent society. At the individual level, the act of repair is empowering. It transforms the consumer from a passive end user into an active participant in the life cycle of their possessions. This fosters valuable skills in problem-solving, manual dexterity, and patience, creating a sense of accomplishment and a deeper connection to the material world that the fleeting joy of a new purchase cannot replicate. This empowerment also has a significant financial dimension. Manufacturer-controlled repair monopolies lead to artificially inflated prices, often forcing consumers into costly replacements. A competitive repair market directly lowers these costs. US PIRG, a consumer advocacy group, estimates that being forced to replace rather than repair items like phones and appliances costs the average American family $330 per year for a national total of $40 billion. The right to repair puts this money back into the pockets of consumers. At the community level, a vibrant repair culture builds economic resilience. It supports a diverse ecosystem of local, independent repair shops, often small, family-owned businesses that are the backbone of local economies. These businesses create skilled jobs and keep capital circulating within the community, reducing reliance on fragile and environmentally costly globalized supply chains. The rise of community-based initiatives like repair cafes, where volunteers help neighbors fix broken items, further illustrates this power to build social cohesion and local self-sufficiency. Finally, the right to repair is a critical issue of equity. The high cost of replacement and manufacturer-controlled repairs disproportionately harms lower-income communities who are most affected by the lack of durable, long-lasting goods. The Federal Trade Commission has explicitly noted that the burden of repair restrictions falls more heavily on these communities. By making repair more affordable and accessible, and by fostering a robust second-hand market for refurbished devices, the right to repair promotes digital equity. It ensures that all members of society, not just the affluent, can afford to own and maintain the essential tools of modern life, such as computers for education and smartphones for work and communication. Thus, the movement should be understood not only as a fight for consumer rights, but as a practical policy tool for reducing household costs, strengthening local economies, and building a more just and equitable society. Part 3. The Robotic Frontier. Applying repair rights to autonomous systems. As the right to repair movement solidifies its principles in the realms of consumer electronics and vehicles, its next and most complex challenge lies in the burgeoning field of robotics. The application of repair rights to autonomous and semi-autonomous systems introduces a new dimension of complexity and risk. Unlike a smartphone, where a failed repair results in financial loss, a malfunctioning industrial or medical robot can have catastrophic consequences for human safety and life. This section provides a focused analysis of the unique challenges of robotic repair, arguing that a monolithic, one-size-fits-all approach is inadequate. A tiered framework is necessary, one that carefully balances the owner's right to repair with the overriding imperatives of safety, reliability, and regulatory compliance in high-stakes environments. 3.1 A Spectrum of Complexity, from Roomba to Da Vinci. The term robot encompasses a vast and diverse range of technologies, each with a distinct risk profile. A coherent policy on robotic repair must therefore begin by acknowledging this spectrum of complexity and tailoring regulations accordingly. At the low-risk end are consumer robotics. Devices like robotic vacuum cleaners, while technologically sophisticated, share many characteristics with the consumer electronics at the heart of the current repair debate. The consequences of a failed repair are primarily economic, and the arguments for applying existing right-to-repair frameworks mandating access to parts, manuals, and diagnostic tools are strong and direct. Moving up the spectrum, agricultural robotics represent a critical economic battleground. Modern tractors, combines, and harvesters are heavily reliant on proprietary software, and manufacturers like John Deere have been accused of using this software to create a monopoly on repair. For farmers, this is not an inconvenience, it is an existential threat. A tractor that is disabled by a software lock during the narrow window of a planting or harvest season can lead to devastating financial losses. The ongoing legal and legislative battles, including the FTC's antitrust lawsuit against John Deere, underscore the high economic stakes and the urgent need for repair rights in this sector. Next are industrial robotics, which operate in manufacturing, logistics, and other controlled environments. While these settings are structured, the robots themselves pose significant physical hazards to human workers. An improperly repaired robotic arm could lead to unpredicted movements, collisions, or crushing injuries. Safety is paramount and is governed by strict standards and regulations from bodies like the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. The increasing use of AI for predictive maintenance adds another layer of software complexity that must be managed safely. Any right to repair in this context must be aligned with existing workplace safety frameworks. At the highest risk end of the spectrum is medical robotics. Systems like the Da Vinci surgical robot are used in life-critical procedures, where any malfunction can have severe and potentially fatal consequences for patients. The debate here is intense, as illustrated by antitrust cases like Surgical Instrument Service, Inc. vs. Intuitive Surgical Inc., which centered on the manufacturer's restrictions on the repair and reuse of critical surgical components. For these systems, the right to repair is inextricably linked to patient safety, regulatory oversight by bodies like the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and complex questions of legal liability. 3.2 The Black Box Problem: Repairing AI and Complex Software. The challenge of robotic repair is compounded by the increasing reliance on artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning, ML algorithms. As robots evolve from purely mechanical, pre-programmed machines to adaptive learning systems, the very concept of repair is transformed. The problem shifts from fixing a broken gear or replacing a faulty sensor to diagnosing and correcting an opaque software system, a black box whose internal logic may not be fully understood even by its creators. Repairing an AI system is not as simple as accessing its source code. It involves a complex interplay of algorithms, massive datasets used for training, and dynamic machine learning frameworks. An inexpert or unauthorized modification, even with good intentions, could have disastrous and unforeseen consequences. It could subtly introduce bias into a decision-making process, degrade the system's performance in unpredictable ways, or create new security vulnerabilities. For example, recalibrating a vision system on an industrial robot without understanding the underlying ML model could lead it to misidentify objects with potentially lethal results. This complexity provides a powerful argument for manufacturers who contend that only they possess the expertise and proprietary knowledge to safely maintain the integrity and reliability of their AI systems. This creates a strong justification for maintaining a closed, walled garden ecosystem for service and maintenance. The nascent field of software repair is grappling with these issues, with some legal scholars suggesting that the principles of the open-source software community, which emphasize transparency, peer review, and collaborative debugging, may offer a more suitable model than the hardware-centric frameworks of the traditional right-to-repair movement. However, applying open-source principles to proprietary, safety-critical AI systems remains a formidable legal and technical challenge. 3.3 Safety-critical systems, the liability labyrinth. In safety-critical domains like industrial manufacturing and medicine, the introduction of independent third-party repairers creates a labyrinth of legal liability that could, if not carefully navigated, stifle innovation and slow the adoption of beneficial robotic technologies. The established legal frameworks of product liability and medical malpractice are predicated on a clearer chain of causality than what exists in a multi-agent robotic system. When an adverse event occurs with a repaired medical robot, assigning responsibility becomes extraordinarily difficult. Was the patient's injury caused by the surgeon's misuse of the device, a latent design flaw from the manufacturer, a software bug, or a faulty component installed by an independent repair technician? Each party has an incentive to point blame at the others, leading to complex and costly litigation that may leave victims without timely recourse. This problem is exacerbated by a significant regulatory gap. Medical device OEMs are subject to strict oversight by the FDA, which governs everything from design and manufacturing to post-market surveillance and adverse event reporting. In contrast, third-party service organizations often operate in a regulatory gray area, with the FDA historically exercising enforcement discretion and not applying the same stringent standards. This disparity in oversight creates a real risk to patient safety. Manufacturers legitimately fear being held liable for injuries resulting from improper independent repairs. While many right-to-repair laws include clauses to shield OEMs from liability for damage caused by third parties, the legal boundaries of these shields are largely untested, especially in cases of personal injury or death. This legal uncertainty increases the risk calculus for manufacturers, which could translate into higher insurance costs, increased prices for devices, or a reluctance to develop innovative but legally risky new technologies. The complexity of this liability landscape suggests that a simple right to parts and manuals is insufficient for high-stakes robotics. It will likely require the development of new legal and insurance frameworks such as mandatory liability insurance for certified repairers, the creation of no-fault compensation funds for certain types of robotic accidents, and new legal standards that clearly apportion liability based on access to diagnostic data and detailed repair logs. Part 4. The opposition, valid concerns and strategic obstacles. The right-to-repair movement is not without formidable opposition. Manufacturers of electronics, vehicles, and other complex equipment have mounted a sustained campaign against such legislation, raising a number of arguments that center on intellectual property, safety, cybersecurity, and quality control. While some of these arguments reflect genuine concerns that any responsible policy must address, others appear to serve primarily as strategic justifications for protecting highly profitable repair monopolies. This section provides a balanced assessment of the opposition's case, disentangling legitimate risks from anti-competitive rhetoric and examining how policymakers have attempted to mitigate these concerns. 4.1 Disentangling the arguments, IP, safety, security, and quality. The case against an unfettered right to repair is typically built on 4 main pillars, each of which warrants careful consideration. The first and most frequently cited concern is the protection of intellectual property, IP. Manufacturers invest heavily in research and development, and they argue that being forced to provide detailed schematics, diagnostic software, and firmware could expose valuable trade secrets to competitors and enable the counterfeiting of their products. They contend that IP rights are essential for fostering innovation, and that weakening these protections would ultimately harm consumers by discouraging investment in new technologies. The second pillar is safety and liability. Opponents argue that allowing untrained consumers or unvetted third-party technicians to repair complex devices creates significant safety risks. They point to the dangers of mishandling high-energy lithium-ion batteries, which can cause fires if punctured, or the risks associated with high-voltage components in appliances and electric vehicles. In the case of medical or agricultural equipment, an improper repair could lead to catastrophic failure, resulting in severe injury or death. Manufacturers worry that despite the fault of the repairer, they could be held liable in subsequent lawsuits, exposing them to immense financial and reputational damage. Closely related is the third pillar, cybersecurity. In an increasingly connected world, nearly every device, from a refrigerator to a car, contains a microprocessor and is connected to the Internet. Manufacturers argue that providing open access to diagnostic ports and software creates new attack vectors for malicious actors. They warn that a bad actor posing as a repair shop could install malware or spyware on a device, steal sensitive personal data, or compromise the security of critical systems like vehicles or home security alarms. This concern is particularly acute for devices that are part of a larger network, where a single compromised device could threaten the entire system. Finally, manufacturers raise the issue of quality control and brand reputation. They express concern that a market flooded with low-quality third-party parts and serviced by technicians of varying skill levels will lead to a poor user experience. If a device fails or underperforms after a shoddy independent repair, the consumer may wrongly blame the original manufacturer, tarnishing a brand's hard-won reputation for quality and reliability. This, they argue, erodes consumer trust and devalues their brand equity. 4.2 Legislating. Trust how policy attempts to mitigate risk. Proponents of the right to repair are not deaf to these concerns. Modern repair legislation is rarely a blanket mandate for unrestricted access. Instead, it is typically crafted with specific provisions designed to find a middle ground and mitigate the most significant risks raised by manufacturers. To address IP concerns, most laws include explicit trade secret exemptions. The New York Digital Fair Repair Act, for example, clarifies that manufacturers are not required to divulge information that would be defined as a trade secret under existing law. The focus of the legislation is on providing the same repair information that is already shared with authorized partners, not on exposing core R&D secrets. To counter the liability argument, legislation often incorporates liability shields. These clauses explicitly state that a manufacturer cannot be held liable for any damage or injury that occurs to a device as a result of a faulty repair performed by an owner or an independent shop. This legally separates the manufacturer's responsibility for the original product from the repairer's responsibility for their service work. In recognition of heightened safety and security risks in certain areas, many laws feature exclusions for high-risk product categories. California's law, for instance, exempts alarm systems and certain other security-related products. Video game consoles are also frequently exempted, not due to safety concerns, but because of manufacturers' arguments that open access would facilitate piracy of copyrighted games. Similarly, many proposals specifically exclude certain classes of highly regulated medical devices where patient safety is the paramount concern. Finally, the laws are not designed to bankrupt manufacturers' service divisions. The common requirement that parts, tools, and information be made available on fair and reasonable terms allows manufacturers to charge for these resources. This ensures that they can recover the costs associated with creating and distributing these materials and continue to operate a service business, albeit one that must now compete on a level playing field with the independent market. 4.3. The burden of proof, the FTC's scant evidence. Finding: while the concerns raised by manufacturers are plausible in theory, they have been subjected to intense scrutiny by regulatory bodies with revealing results. A pivotal moment in the US debate was the publication of the Federal Trade Commission's FTC 2021 report to Congress, titled Nixing the Fix. After a thorough investigation that included soliciting comments from all stakeholders, the bipartisan commission concluded that there was scant evidence to support manufacturers' justifications for repair restrictions. The FTC's report systematically challenged the opposition's core arguments. On the issue of safety, the Commission found no empirical evidence to suggest that independent repair shops are any less safe than authorized ones. In fact, it noted that manufacturers' own practices, such as withholding information about the dangers of certain repairs, could themselves exacerbate safety risks by forcing technicians to work without proper guidance. On cybersecurity, the report was equally skeptical, stating that the record contains no empirical evidence to suggest that independent repair shops are more or less likely than authorized repair shops to compromise or misuse customer data. This finding was echoed by independent cybersecurity experts who testified that the security risks cited by manufacturers were often disingenuous and false. They argued that most cyber attacks exploit vulnerabilities that are built into products from the factory, not introduced during repair. A closed repair ecosystem can actually create a single point of failure. If a vulnerability is discovered, users are entirely dependent on the manufacturer to issue a timely patch. A more open system, in contrast, allows a wider community of security researchers to identify and develop fixes for flaws, potentially leading to more robust security overall. This reframes the debate from a simple choice between open and secure to a more complex choice between two different security models: the manufacturer's preferred security through obscurity versus the repair advocate's model of security through transparency. This official finding by a major regulatory body has significantly shifted the policy debate. It places the burden of proof squarely on manufacturers to provide concrete data rather than anecdotal evidence or hypothetical scenarios to justify their restrictive practices. The lack of such evidence suggests that while some concerns may be valid in specific high-risk contexts, many of the arguments are primarily deployed to protect economic interests rather than the public good. Part 5. The Final Frontier: Repair, Self-Sufficiency, and Off-World Colonization. The right to repair debate, while currently focused on terrestrial concerns of economics and environment, finds its ultimate and most profound justification in the future of human expansion into space. In the isolated and unforgiving environments of off-world colonies on the Moon or Mars, the principles of repairability, modification, and self-sufficiency are not matters of consumer choice or economic policy. They are absolute prerequisites for survival. This final section elevates the discussion from a terrestrial legal framework to a fundamental imperative for humanity's future, arguing that any successful off-world settlement must be built upon a foundation of complete and unrestricted repairability. 5.1. The Tyranny of Distance, the Untenable Off-World Supply Chain. The core challenge of any permanent human presence beyond Earth is what can be termed the tyranny of distance. The logistical and economic hurdles of transporting mass from Earth's gravity well are immense. NASA estimates the cost to send a single pound of material into space is around $10,000. A resupply mission to Mars, feasible only during specific launch windows that occur roughly every 26 months, would take many months to arrive. In this context, a reliance on an Earth-based supply chain for critical spare parts and equipment is not merely inefficient, it is an existential risk. The goal of any serious colonization effort is to establish a self-sustaining settlement, one that can utilize local resources to support its population and achieve economic and technical independence from Earth. This is not an optional objective, but a fundamental requirement. A single point of failure in a critical system, such as a water reclaimer, an atmospheric processor, or a power generator, could be catastrophic if a replacement part is millions of miles and months, or even years, away. A colony that cannot repair its own essential equipment is a colony living on borrowed time. The arguments used by manufacturers on Earth to restrict repair, protecting market share, ensuring brand quality, controlling the user experience, become tragically absurd in this context. A proprietary screw, or a software lock, that prevents a colonist from fixing a life support system is not a commercial strategy. It is a direct threat to the survival of the entire settlement. Therefore, self-sufficiency, underpinned by the universal ability to maintain, diagnose, repair, and fabricate necessary components on site, is the foundational principle upon which any viable off-world human presence must be built. 5.2. The off-world repair shop, 3D printing and in-situ manufacturing. The enabling technology for off-world self-sufficiency is additive manufacturing, more commonly known as 3D printing. The ability to fabricate complex parts and tools on demand from raw materials, ideally sourced locally through in-situ resource utilization, has the potential to revolutionize space exploration and settlement. Instead of launching a massive inventory of every conceivable spare part, a mission can launch raw feedstock and a 3D printer, dramatically reducing mass and increasing flexibility. Space agencies like NASA and the European Space Agency, ESA, are already actively developing and testing this capability. Plastic 3D printers have been operational on the International Space Station, ISS, since 2014, used to create tools and replacement parts. More recently, the focus has shifted to metal 3D printing, which would allow for the fabrication of load-bearing structural components, further enhancing autonomy. This technology is seen as a game-changer for supporting life beyond Earth, essential for future missions to the Moon and Mars. However, the physical printer is only half of the equation. The ability to print a part is entirely contingent on having access to its digital blueprint, the computer-aided design, a CAD file, and associated manufacturing parameters. This is where the right to repair debate becomes critical. A universal right to repair in an off-world context must evolve into a right to the data required for fabrication. This puts the needs of the colony in direct conflict with the terrestrial business models of manufacturers, which are based on protecting proprietary designs and selling physical objects. If a colonist can download a file and print any proprietary component, the manufacturer's IP-based control over the aftermarket evaporates. For a colony to be truly self-sufficient, the designs for its critical systems cannot be proprietary black boxes. They must be open, accessible, and available for local fabrication. 5.3. Redefining ownership in the void, space law, and the common heritage of mankind. The extreme context of space provides a unique legal and ethical framework for resolving the conflict between corporate IP rights and the necessity of repair. International space law, established during the Cold War, was designed to prevent conflict and promote the peaceful, collective exploration of this new domain. Its foundational document, the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, establishes several principles that are highly relevant to the right to repair. The treaty declares that the exploration and use of outer space shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries, and that space is the province of all mankind. It explicitly states that outer space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. While subsequent interpretations and national laws, such as the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, have created legal pathways for the commercial extraction of resources, the underlying principle that space is a shared domain, not a territory for exclusive claims, remains intact. This principle of the common heritage of mankind fundamentally alters the ethical calculus of repair restrictions. In the closed, high-risk environment of a Martian colony, a proprietary software lock on a vital piece of life support equipment is not a mere commercial dispute. It is a direct threat to the province of mankind located at that settlement. The collective right to survival must, by any reasonable ethical standard, supersede the individual corporation's right to protect its intellectual property. The philosophical framework of Kantian deontology, which posits a duty to preserve the persistence of human life, would support the argument that ensuring the survival of an off-world colony is a categorical imperative. In this context, the right to repair transforms into a duty to ensure repairability. Any entity, whether public or private, that provides technology for a human settlement in space would have an overriding ethical and legal obligation to ensure that technology is completely and transparently repairable. This would necessitate providing all schematics, diagnostic tools, software source code, and material specifications needed for its maintenance and replication. The necessities of space will likely force the development of a new paradigm for technology, one based on open, robust, and universally serviceable systems. This push for open-source hardware and software for space applications could, in turn, have a profound spin-off effect, accelerating the development of more durable, sustainable, and repairable products for everyone back on Earth. Conclusion: the enduring value of mending. The right to repair movement, in its journey from the mechanic's garage to the frontiers of space, reveals a fundamental truth. The act of mending is not a relic of a bygone era, but a profoundly forward-looking imperative. It is a practical response to the environmental excesses of a linear economy, a tool for economic justice and community resilience, a necessary framework for governing the risks of autonomous systems, and an absolute prerequisite for a sustainable human future beyond Earth. The analysis presented in this report demonstrates that restricting repair is not merely an inconvenience, but a systemic flaw in our current technological and economic paradigm, one with cascading negative consequences for property rights, environmental health, social equity, and long-term security. The core conflict is a modern reenactment of a historical struggle over the meaning of ownership. The infusion of software into physical products has been leveraged by manufacturers to demote consumers from owners to licensees, creating closed ecosystems that stifle competition and generate vast quantities of preventable waste. In response, a global legislative movement has emerged, with the European Union's holistic, design-focused approach and Canada's targeted amendments to copyright law offering promising, albeit different, models for restoring consumer rights. The stakes are highest where technology intersects with human well-being. In the field of robotics, a simple right to parts and manuals is insufficient. The spectrum of complexity, from a consumer vacuum to a surgical robot, demands a tiered regulatory approach that prioritizes safety and accountability. The introduction of third-party repairers into these safety-critical systems will force a necessary and overdue reckoning in tort law, compelling the creation of new frameworks for liability and certification in an age of automation. Ultimately, the argument for repair finds its most powerful expression in the context of off-world colonization. In the isolation of space, self-sufficiency is synonymous with survival. The ability to maintain, repair, and fabricate critical systems on site is non-negotiable, transforming the right to repair from a consumer preference into a fundamental human right to life. The practical necessities of space will inevitably subordinate terrestrial intellectual property concerns to the collective good, likely catalyzing a new era of open-source, universally serviceable hardware that will yield benefits for all of humanity. Mending what is broken is an act of stewardship, innovation, and resilience. It is time for our laws and our technologies to reflect its enduring value. Recommendations based on the comprehensive analysis conducted, the following strategic recommendations are proposed for policymakers, industry leaders, and strategic planners. For terrestrial policy, adopt a hybrid global standard. Nations should move toward a hybrid legislative framework that combines the most effective elements of existing models. This would involve integrating the EU's proactive eco-design principles, which mandate repairability from the design stage and require consumer-facing repairability scores, with the US model's focus on ensuring robust aftermarket competition and Canada's surgical approach to reforming intellectual property laws like the DMCA and its equivalents to explicitly permit circumvention of digital locks for repair. For robotics, develop a tiered international regulatory framework. Given the diverse risk profiles of robotic systems, a one-size-fits-all approach is untenable. International standards bodies, in conjunction with national regulators, such as the FDA and OSHA, should collaborate to create a tiered framework for robotic repair. Tier 1 consumer robots. Apply existing consumer electronics right to repair laws. Tier 2 industrial and agricultural robots require certification programs for independent technicians and mandate manufacturer-provided access to diagnostic software and error logs to ensure both economic viability and workplace safety. Tier 3 medical and safety-critical robots. Implement the highest level of oversight, requiring third-party repair organizations to be licensed, audited, and held to the same regulatory standards as the original manufacturer, coupled with the development of clear legal frameworks for apportioning liability. For future technology, mandate repairability by design as a core principle. The most effective long-term solution is to prevent unrepairable products from being created in the first place. Repairability by design should be adopted as a core principle for all future technology development, especially for artificial intelligence systems, critical infrastructure, and any technology intended for off-world use. This principle should be embedded in government procurement standards, R&D funding criteria, and international technical standards, ensuring that the next generation of technology is built to last, to be mended, and to sustain, rather than to be discarded.